The night at Willow Bend. It was a chill night in late October, and Claire was making her way back from a late shift at the cafe where she worked. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a curtain of stars and a faint sliver of moonlight. Her little sedan hummed quietly along the winding country road, the thick trees on either side reaching out like skeletal fingers against the dark sky. As she drove past the last glimmers of civilization, the comforting glow of streetlights gave way to lonely stretches of asphalt and dense foliage. This was familiar territory. Having grown up nearby, Claire knew these roads like the back of her hand. Yet, an unsettling feeling crept over her as she navigated the bends. Perhaps it was the chill in the air, or maybe the unnerving silence interrupted only by her radio's crackling static. But something felt distinctly off. Just as she rounded a particularly sharp curve, her car sputtered unexpectedly. No, no, she muttered, instinctively gripping the steering wheel tighter. The dashboard lights flickered ominously before failing completely. With a cough and a sputter, her car came to a complete stop, the engine dying like the dying embers of a fire. Claire sighed heavily, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Perfect," she said, to no one but herself. She had no cell service out here, and the nearest town was a good 15 miles back. Reluctantly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out into the cold. The air was crisp, each breath visible in the moonlit night. The darkness felt alive, oppressive even, as shadows darted between the branches. Clutching her phone, she turned it on and noticed there was no reception. "Great," she whispered through clenched teeth, the weight of solitude pressing down on her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. Maybe she could flag down a car, or perhaps make it to a nearby house. As she began to walk along the roadside, the stillness around her deepened. The only sound was the crunch of gravel underfoot and the rustle of leaves moving with the breeze. She started to feel acutely aware of how isolated she was, away from the warmth of her car and the safety of civilization. To her left stood the woods, a dark canvas of despair, and to her right, the empty road stretched into eternity. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and just as doubt began to seep in, Claire heard a faint rustling sound coming from the trees. Her heart pounded as she squinted into the gnarled branches, where shadows danced and tangled together. She forced herself to keep moving, picking up her pace but casting anxious glances over her shoulder. Then, from behind her, she noticed the subtle flicker of headlights. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly overshadowed by an unsettling feeling as the car slowed down and pulled over beside her. The vehicle was a battered old pickup, and its windows were darkened, the interior cloaked in shadow. "Need a ride?" a voice called out, its tone gruff yet oddly inviting. Claire hesitated, her instincts flaring. She considered the dangers of hitching a ride with a stranger. My car broke down," she shouted back, trying to keep her tone light. "I just need to get to a phone." The figure in the driver's seat shifted slightly but remained obscured in the dim light. "A lot of folks don't stop out here at night. It can be dangerous." Her heart raced. There was something about his voice, an unsettling undertone that made her spine tingle. "I know, but I really can't just wait here," she replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. Just then, the rustling in the woods intensified, sounding almost like footsteps, as something began to break from the cover of darkness. Claire glanced over her shoulder, her instincts screaming for her to run. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll wait for someone else," she said hurriedly, trying to contain her rising panic. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began walking again, agilely moving away from the pickup. Behind her, the engine revved, and the truck sped off, its tires kicking up gravel in a chaotic spray. The moment Claire thought she found her bearings again, the rattling sound returned, now accompanied by distant whispers drifting through the air. It was as if the very words were alive, groaning and muttering in hushed tones. She halted in her tracks, peering into the darkness from which the sounds seemed to emanate. With a jolt, fear took hold. Whatever it was that lurked in the woods appeared determined to find her. She turned to retrace her steps back to the car, deciding that confinement in her vehicle felt safer than this relentless exposure to the unknown. Yet, as she drew nearer, the path felt foreign and twisted. The trees appeared denser, almost closing in on her, as if conspiring to keep her from her destination. Panic drove her to a sprint. She threads through the limbs and branches, calling out in hopes that someone might hear, "Help! Somebody help me!" Finally, she could see the dim silhouette of her sedan edging closer through the barrage of black. But just as she reached it, she froze in horror. The car doors stood wide open, the interior a gaping mouth, eager to swallow her whole. And in the shadows cast by the moonlight, she saw a figure, hunched over the passenger seat, rifling through her belongings. "Hey!" Claire shouted, her voice almost swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The figure snapped upright with a start, revealing a face that was hidden until now by shadows. Dirt-stained skin, wide eyes filled with a mix of shock and something darker. He stumbled back into the tree line, parting the branches with a rustling thrum, disappearing into the abyss. Claire's heart raced as she fumbled for her keys inside her pockets, hands shaking. She jumped into the driver's seat, locking the door in panic. All around her, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of dissonance that clawed at her sanity. Sweat dripped down her forehead, mingling with the chilling air that enveloped her. But the increasing creature-like murmurs were suddenly interrupted by a low growl that vibrated against the metal structure of the car. Staring through the windshield, Claire's blood turned to ice. Two glowing eyes peered at her through the darkness, reflecting the moonlight in a sinister gleam. A heavy silhouette moved slowly forward, something primal that seemed to relish her fear. With no other choice, she cranked the ignition, desperately praying the car would respond. The engine roared to life like a beast awakened, and the growling ceased for the faintest second, creating a horrifying stillness that suffocated her. Without thinking, Claire slammed her foot on the gas, and her little sedan surged forward, tires spinning in the gravel. The moment she swerved back onto the road, she glanced into her rearview mirror, a mistake she would forever regret. Standing at the tree line was the same figure, now accompanied by shadows that shifted and pointed toward her like fingers, beckoning her back into darkness. The glow of their eyes multiplied, a chilling spectacle of monsters waiting in the woods. As she sped away, tears streamed down her cheeks, heart thumping violently in her chest. The tree line receded, but the tormenting energy trailed behind her, a malignant weight pressing against her soul. The distant whispers faded, but left behind an insidious whisper in her mind. "You can't outrun what you can't see." Her thoughts raced as she pushed the speedometer higher, praying the town would come into view. The road ahead felt endless, stretching into infinity as darkness enveloped her. But one thought, laced with a sense of foreboding, prevailed in her mind. What followed her warned her to never return to Willow Bend again. And as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that the secrets those woods held were far from buried, waiting, hungry, and watching.